Mike Muse is an industrial engineer, a music executive, a political architect. He breaks down the intersection of politics and pop culture. This is the Mike Muse Show.
I got realness, I just kill shit cause it's in my DNA.
What's up, bro? It's your boy, Mike Muse. Welcome to an episode of the Mike Muse Show. I am super excited for this conversation. I just want to thank you guys for engaging in Vote Quadrant the way that you have. VoteQuadrant.com. Also on Instagram and Twitter, it's at Vote Quadrant. And as always, the hashtag is hashtag Vote Quadrant. And I thought, what a better time than to really interview someone who represents the quadrants. And that is the mayor, the police commissioner and or chief, depending upon your city and jurisdiction, the district attorney, and the judge. And so today I would like to bring into conversation with me someone who I've been watching from afar. And I thought it was a perfect time to bring him in now and to have conversations with him. Alvin Bragg is a fantastic attorney who has a really impressive, impeccable track record, who has now thrown in his hat to run for the district attorney of Manhattan. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the show, Mr. Alvin Bragg. What's happening, Alvin?
Oh, thank you so much for having me on, Mike, and for elevating this really urgent and important conversation.
Talk to us about why that the square of district attorney is so important to dealing and addressing and ending police brutality.
It is the amount of discretion and power that rests with the district attorney's office. You know, and I say that humbly as someone who's been a prosecutor. It is, you know, you have the power to take away liberty, and it's got to be used judiciously, with caution and with measure. And it's you know, sort of, I don't say unchecked because you have a judge who will review your conduct, but, you know, the police, everyone generally knows that dynamic. You're on the street, they've got the power to arrest, but they've got to take that to a district attorney, and the district attorney said, no, I'm not going to do that case. You know, that homeless man you just arrested for trespass, kind of case that I'm not interested in doing, like, I'm not going to do that. That does not make us safer. And no one can say no. No one can, the police officer can't take an appeal. It can't, you know, make the district attorney bring a case. So that's very, I mean, generally people think about the power in this affirmative way of the power to take away the liberty, and that's vast, and we need to talk about that. But there's this other power to say, look, no, you know, I'm not going to do that case. So the amount of discretion and the things that are in our system that should not be criminal matters, things that government should intervene on. You know, homelessness, we need to be attacking that issue through other levers, just not through the criminal justice system. So just the amount of discretion that is in that box, interacting with the other boxes, of course, you know, we need to be very cautious about who we put in those positions. And for decades, you know, really the history of the country, it's been sort of an undemocratic process. DAs elected over and over again without opposition. So I think it's great that you're focusing people on not just my race, it's just, you know, nationwide. It's important, nationwide.
So to go where you went, where you mentioned you guys have discretion to take or not to take on a case, right? So I think it's important for the listeners to really understand why the district attorney is so important in that quadrant, because district attorneys decide if, and Alvin, I want to keep this in the structure if you don't mind, and so I'll qualify it for you, you know, audience. You know, the district attorney just does not focus on police brutality. The district attorney focuses on all criminal justice systems within the scope of law. And they look at all the cases that you can think of across the nation. But Alvin, for this one, and for our conversation here for the next few minutes, if we can just focus on the police brutality, right? And let me just say this, police conduct, right? And how that works out. So for this example, you just mentioned you guys had the discretion to take on a case or to not take on a case, in particular when it comes to police conduct and police brutality. Talk to us then about the importance of electing a district attorney, or what do you think is good constitutional grounds of an individual, their personal constitution, to understand human life, to understand Black life, to understand life of marginalized communities, right? And bringing that case forward to prosecution. Because what I'm thinking about as Alvin is, and I'm not here to retry cases or quarterback what went wrong in other cases, But we've seen cases that come up with a not guilty verdict because the prosecutor just didn't seem in it, right? It didn't seem like they were doing it because the social pressure and the public pressure to do it, but it seemed really half-assed.
So the relationship on these kind of cases, right? The prosecutor, the DA, and the police are working day in and day out on all these other cases, right? Then, like you said, oftentimes there's a protest. So you need to do this case against this police officer. So there's this structural issue where the many of our district attorneys, I say most, are not sufficiently independent from the police, right? So they're working with them on all these other cases. Then this comes along, and there's a dependency. There's not an objective approach. And so, I look at these things. That's a structural issue. We can talk about ways to sort of address that. But, I come at this stuff from, I've worked with law enforcement, I've made cases with them. But my first interaction with the criminal justice system was, when I was a teenager, grew up in Harlem. I'm walking to the corner store. My parents are giving me the talk. If you get stopped by the police, keep your hands out. Okay, stay safe. You got rights, but want you to come home alive. I'm walking to the corner store to get some bread and juice for my parents, and I get stopped. Back in the day, if you white people in Harlem were either there undercover officers or they were there, as a part of drug activity, and seconds later, I'm got 4 white men with no uniforms on pointing guns at me. So that's when I think about a police case. Like my very first interaction with the criminal justice system was excessive, the militarized reaction, digging in my pockets. I didn't need to go to law school to know that was unlawful, right? You can't just roll up on me and just throw your hands in my pockets and say I'm a drug dealer, right? Now, I was fortunate. I got my life, got to go away. But I've had, like so many other, not just black men, but black people, black men, women, boys, girls. Like that's my orientation. And we need more people like that, right? I mean, we are not in the system as prosecutors, and I know this is a different box, but also as judges, we're not there. We need people who have that life experience. So how does that translate, right? So, you get a case that's, it involves police misconduct, and there's allegations of an unlawful search. You have some prosecutors who from a different walk of life, oh, that never happens. Oh, I worked with this officer the other day. I trust this guy. It's like, well, no. I've actually had these conversations in offices I've worked on. Well, no, that happens. You know me, you trust me, right? Well, I'm going to tell you, I've had that happen to me, not just once, but multiple times. And so we need people in the room who can drive that conversation and would look at this police misconduct, not as someone that's above the system or separate from the system, or even for that matter, a partner in the system. No. This is someone just like everyone else who can do wrong, who needs to be independently and objectively investigated. So I can speak forcefully on that issue. One, because personally, I grew up, being stopped all the time. This is before, stop and frisk had a name, right? This is just when they stopped you. There was no name to even call it. You just went home and said, I had a gun put in my face. Then professionally, I've worked on a number of these cases, prosecuting a number of these cases. So you develop an expertise in them too.
Alvin, I'm trying to do my best not to scream when you were talking, because I want to make sure the way this Zoom conversation works is that the camera stay on you the entire time. I don't want to make a noise, but this is it. Like, this is what you just said is why Vote Quadrant matters, right? What you just said is the educational information our citizens need to hear and understand of the importance of a district attorney, but the importance of a district attorney who has lived experience or can be empathetic to experiences that they can bring into their office when the folder gets dropped on their desk to determine whether or not they're going to prosecute. And then from there, that lived experience or that empathetic nature that would then carry on into a courtroom to fight with tenaciousness and to make sure that justice is served to those who have been wronged. And that's it. I mean, we can literally just end the interview and then there we go. So let me just try and stay calm and keep this conversation linear, as I want to make sure that people are being educated and not being excited by what you're saying. Let's take it back. Let's go to the grand jury, because what we've heard, and this is something we can talk about because it's an ongoing thing and previous district attorney has passed on it. If you look at Ahmaud Arbery, right? We saw like they had 1, 2, 3 district attorneys who passed and said, you know, they didn't want to take it to a grand jury or those type of things. We keep hearing this terminology about grand jury. Talk to us a little bit about, and not about the Ahmaud Arbery scenario, but talk to us a little bit. Audience, I just brought the Ahmaud Arbery scenario in there, so that's the most recent things that we've heard about grand juries. But talk to us about the role of a DA in a grand jury. You know, how come sometimes the DA goes in a grand jury, they don't come out with indictments? You know, in other areas we hear that, you know, it's easy to prosecute, it's easy to get indictment in a grand jury. You know, bologna sandwich, I've heard that line used a bunch of times. The bologna sandwich can get indicted when you go to a grand jury. So then talk to us about the importance of having a strong DA who understands empathy and lives experience to come out with indictments within a grand jury.
So I'm glad this is one of the most important institutions in our system. So, you know, for folks who may not know, right, folks who mostly watch Law and Order or, you know, one of these other shows, we think about a jury that's at trial. That's the jury that decides whether you'll be, you know, convicted or acquitted. But at the beginning of the system, that's the beginning of the system, you can be arrested, as you see sort of, on the street, goes to the prosecutor's office. In most states, in order to go forward with a felony, it's just a serious crime like Ahmaud Arbery, so like you got to then go to this grand jury. Feels like a jury in terms of people drawn from the citizenry. They sit and they deliberate. But what's different is there's no judge in the room and there's no defense attorney. It is just the prosecutor, so the district attorney, the witnesses, and the people who are in the grand jury. And the amount of control that district attorneys have, they advise on the law, right? They decide which witnesses to bring in. They ask the witnesses questions. There's no cross-examination. So grand juries, as a general matter, do what prosecutors want to do. They follow the lead, which is where that expression that Mike just used, like indicted ham sandwich. The indictment rate in most jurisdictions is high. Then when you get to these police cases, all of a sudden, there are no indictments. So you have these DAs saying, well, I'm going to go into the grand jury. I'm going to take this to the people, right? And then they come out and they say, well, the people decided there are no charges. There's no more I can do. And they hide behind the secrecy of the grand jury. Because what happens in the grand jury in most jurisdictions is secret. So they hide behind it. I went to the people and the people spoke. We got to all move on and heal now. It is used to shield injustice. And I used to say this, and people would say, well, no, you're questioning prosecutors' integrity. You don't know what going to. So let me just, if I can, tell a story about a case I handled. There was up near Albany in New York, in the New York capital, not far away, there was a unarmed black man, a motorist. He was driving a car, and he was shot at 8 times and killed by a police officer. District attorney, rushed the case into the grand jury, came out, a few days later and said, oh, there are no charges here. There was only this one officer who shot. That officer is clear. So I was at the Attorney General's office, statewide, and we had jurisdiction over this sort of thing. So we sued the district attorney to get his file and basically took over the case. And when we looked at what he had done, and this case is still open, so I will, I should use the term allegedly, we looked at his file and we ended up charging that district attorney, the head of the office, for going into the grand jury, and we alleged that he basically withheld key evidence from the grand jury. Like he didn't tell the whole story, right? And then there was only one officer that fired, and we alleged he gave immunity to that one officer. So even if the grand jury had come back and said, hey, this officer did it, he was immunized, which made him basically free from prosecution. People would say, oh, this is a movie, this is real life. So we indicted we brought that district attorney into our grand jury, right? And the kicker on that one, we also alleged perjury that he lied in our grand jury. So there's an active case against that. He's a former district attorney, he got voted out. But when people say to me, that doesn't happen, you're impugning people's integrity. Look, I lived it. I saw him do it, and he allegedly abused the institution of the grand jury. And the question is, how many other times has this happened? If I could talk about Arbery for just a second.
Please.
When I saw that, first thing I thought about was this case I handled, right? So these DAs, they just declined completely. They didn't even go through the grand jury, act. They just said, no. And one of them wrote a letter to the police saying why there was no probable cause for an arrest here. I mean, I don't practice in that state. I don't know the law, but that's crazy, right? Like, we've seen the video. And so this notion that prosecutors, we talk a lot about police accountability, but we need prosecutor accountability, right?
That's it. That's it right there, because I'm so glad you brought that case up that you love to reference. And my audience knows I love to use that word precedent. It's like my favorite word. Alvin, I think in a previous life, I was either an attorney or I tried to go to law school in a previous lifetime, or I must fail the LSAT or something happened. But like, for some reason, I love law. I love the word precedent.
You distill legal concepts better than a lot of lawyers I know.
I am thankful for that. You just brought me something, and I want to make sure we start to say linear, because I don't want to throw too much at the audience and get us just all sidetracked, because what you're saying is so good, but only that means that you have to come back for part 2 of this conversation. Talk to us a bit about prosecutor immunity. I want to move on, and if you can kind of condense it. Is that a thing? Can prosecutors who are currently prosecutors be charged for prosecutor integrity or mishandling of cases?
So historically, the review of prosecutors has been, weak and diffuse in terms of who can do it. There's in most states the place to go is the sort of the bar, which oversees all lawyers. You can file a grievance, but as a general matter, at least here in New York, the bar, while an action is pending, they don't want to get in the middle of another, an actual criminal case. If you're saying, oh, the district attorney didn't do this in this case, they'll generally defer to the judge. So the review and oversight has been patchwork and not robust. So, when we brought this case against the district attorney, we actually had people say, you can't prosecute a district attorney. But we said, show us where that is in the law, right? Like,
Alvin, you just broke something, I think. I think that's a conversation we need to start engaging in now, to seeing the responsibility, because that accountability would then ensure that these district attorneys will fight on behalf of all citizens within their community. 2 parts of the quadrant, and I know your campaign manager is probably thinking, when's going to start talking about our campaign points, but you are literally talking about your campaign and why you are just demonstrating why individuals should consider you for this position, because your understanding of this is brilliant, brother. The judges, I don't want to go too deep into the judges. I'm going to have a judge on relatively soon here to talk about the judges' role in the quadrant. But for you as a district attorney, how important is it to have a judge sitting on the bench who has empathy and lived experiences? Because how qualified a judge is, you're not supposed to do a litmus test, if you will, when you're electing the judge, because they don't know what case is going to come before them, the evidence and the law and all the legalese kind of thing, right? So I talk about trying understanding a judge from a very empathetic, personal, lived experience. How important is that for you when you're facing a judge, when you're bringing forward a case of police brutality, right, or police misconduct, to have a judge like that on the bench?
So, I don't know all the personal backgrounds of the judges I've appeared in front of. I think I can venture a guess to say not many of them have the type of lived experience we've been talking about, just from what's in the public domain and my interaction with them. I've had a couple of appearances before judges I hold in high regard who I think have, and you can see the difference, particularly in this type of case, the way look, everyone in the courtroom should be treated with fairness, right? Everyone who comes before the court, and I think there are some judges who particularly, they feel that and they go out of their way to do that. I think these kind of cases involving law enforcement misconduct are so charged that you need a very careful judge, because everything's going to be scrutinized about it. You need a judge who's going to control the courtroom. There's often a lot of media and some things. I handled a case where we kept some things out of evidence, which should not have been in evidence. They were about, a lot of the playbook is about, the person who was killed, and they want to talk about, things in that person's background. But the media reported on it, and that had, I think, an effect on the case. So I want a judge who's going to control the courtroom, be focused on fairness for the police officer defendant, because that's important. We all have due process rights, but to understand that there's a broader backdrop. A lot of these cases, the playbook for the police officer's lawyer is to really try to dehumanize the Black person they killed. I want a judge who understands that. I want a judge who says, yeah, you can try your case, but but I'm not going to let you be racist in my courtroom, right? I want a judge who understands that. And I think prosecutors, we need to be more aggressive in that. That's one lesson I learned. We have to safeguard everyone's rights, but we got to call out, one, when they're trying to pander to the media, which can be hard because there's First Amendment issues there, or two, when they are injecting things that are, the dangerous black man, right? They don't say it like that, but we need to really aggressively police that, and having someone on the bench who's not afraid of, handling race.
Yeah.
Is helpful.
Alvin, I love that. I don't want this conversation to be 2 hours. This is so good, Alvin. Like, I'm so pumped talking to you right now. I'm just like, this is what we need. We need more people like you, period. We need more people like you running. We need more people like you to have an understanding of this. I'm pumped because I knew this is what was happening. This is why I created the whole Quadrant. And you're helping not only people understand your constitution, why you should be the next district attorney, but you're also too validating what the whole Quadrant is and amplifying the importance of it, right? And this is I keep saying a solution. I'm about to just start flexing and saying the solution. To go towards your campaign now, and I'm a segue in your campaign. I'm not going to focus on the mayor in this conversation Quadrant, but on the police chief, police commissioner Quadrant goes into your campaign. When I was doing research on this, and I'm not going to say I looked at every district attorney's candidacy in the nation, and I'm not going to say I looked at every district attorney who's currently an attorney, track record and platform what they're running on. You're running on something very unique that I haven't seen, and that is police accountability and police transparency. I think that's how you titled it, and you can correct me after I'm done if I'm saying it wrong. But you are advocating that when police misconduct occurs, you're going to handle it with a special prosecution, a special thing. Talk to us a little bit about that area of your platform and why that area of platform is so important to carve out, because the district attorney and the police that is the issue, is that historically they've always worked so close together that there is no separation. So we can't trust anything will be brought forward, and then we can't trust any accountability. So talk to us a little bit about that. You can do it way better than I can.
No, the way you distilled this stuff is great. I mean, this is, I think, key to me from my lived experience and also my professional experience. So when I was the number 2 lawyer in our statewide office, the state attorney general's office. So, Keith Ellison's handling the case in Minnesota. I had a role like that statewide in New York. And we had a separate unit that didn't do anything else. And so I think that kind of independence is the first thing. The DA's office needs a separate unit with prosecutors who don't have other cases with the police department. Right, so they're not worried about the next day the officer who they're investigating, his buddy, showing up on a case where they need that person to testify. So they need to be off to the side, if you will, in a contained unit. Then they need the expertise. These cases are challenging, so people in a special unit who develop the expertise, and maybe even most importantly, we need people who want to do this work. Right, there are a lot of prosecutors, a lot of people drawn to prosecutor's office, which this is so sensitive they don't want to do it. People. If you want, sex trafficking is your focus, or domestic violence, but we need people who want to do these cases. So when I hired up for my unit at the Attorney General's office, my first hire was someone who had done a number of homicide prosecutions, but he also had a master's in social work. And that told me something about him, right? Like, he had a broader view on these things. I brought in someone else who also had this sort of expertise to do the cases, but she was going every month, once a month, to a facility and teaching yoga to women who were detained in a women's facility in her neighborhood. Right? Like, we need people who are thinking about these issues holistically, really for all of our cases. But on this, we need people who are like, okay, I'll run to the fire. Right? I will do the hard case because that's what justice requires. So I would say, independent, not working with the police, being very careful about the hiring, and then going back to what you talked about, the grand jury and transparency. Every investigation we did, when we didn't bring charges, we released a comprehensive report. We didn't say, oh, no, you can't tell me because of the grand jury. You can build a case without using the grand jury. It's a little harder, takes a little focus. We did that, and then we were able to tell, importantly, the public, but also the affected families, this is what happened. And, the law as it is right now doesn't allow us to bring a case, but here's all the facts we found, and here's our legal analysis. You don't have to trust us on take our word for it. No. Like, we wrote it all out. We cited all the cases, and then, importantly, looking forward, even when we couldn't bring a case, we would make a recommendation. Like, how can we avoid this from happening? What is the structural reform we need? So I think we need district attorneys who are thinking broadly like that, and also are just saying, like, look, like, I may not be able to charge every case, but I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to sit across from the family, walk you through it, and I'm going to go out, talk to the public. I mean, I had our first case we couldn't bring. We had a press conference, and I stood there. I had a PowerPoint, and I stood there until every single question was answered, right? Because people deserve to know. And I'll just sort of end this piece at this point. When I first took that position in the Attorney General's office, one of the first meetings was with affected family members. And some of the stuff they told me had happened in other offices, district attorneys not calling them back, district attorneys treating them like they're the perp, right? Like they just lost a loved one who just died, and they show up to the scene and they're being interviewed like they're suspects. So changing that orientation and making this family-centered, working and doing the investigation, but informing the families, and then particularly when you reach your conclusion, if it's not a prosecution because of the law, and I can talk about how the law should change, or if it's just not prosecution because it's something that's bad, but was an accident or something, you got to explain that to people. We have not done that historically. Prosecutors have stood up and said, "Take my word for it."
Alvin, you're getting to something so good right now, and I love how you use as a district attorney, you're thinking about the hiring practices, right? And that goes into a whole different realm, which we want to talk about, but in terms of how we need more responsible HR processes and how we hire people and backgrounds, what they hire people for, in a range of different industries. But you thinking about that social worker that you hired to bring on to investigate this, it's so important. So I love how you're thinking about it in terms of how you create independent investigations based upon people who had unique experiences and backgrounds, and you'll pay attention to that. How can we, let me set this up differently. I get frustrated recently, and there's something that gets me more emotional is this whole narrative of, well, the good cops are out there and we got to make sure that, we amplify the good cops. And I'm like, cool. Where have the good cops been? Right? Like the good cops have not been standing up. Right? And I tell all the good cops, y'all know who you are. Y'all always DM me and you always say you're the good cop. I get it. And I keep asking you to say that on my public feed, on my public comment, but you guys won't. Right? So until you come out and publicly say you're the good cop and you disavow, the actions of the bad cops, you're silent to me. You just saying it to me means nothing. Right? So I've been really on these good cops to be vocal. But I also too understand, I talked to a mayor, I'm not going to call this mayor out, but I was a little disappointed in his response about it almost needs to be like a whistleblower protection act for the good cops to come out because the police unions are so powerful, right? And I'm not here for you to get into that conversation. Let me just talk to the audience and not to you, Alvin. But the police unions are so powerful that they are afraid, I believe the good cops are, to go against their brethren, and I get it. So to circle back into you, Alvin, because I don't want it to seem like my interpretation of your candidacy is anti-cop based upon independent investigations. So Alvin, what would you do, because the district attorney needs the police for their other cases outside of police misconduct? How would you ensure a really good, because I think this is important, how would you ensure a really good working environment where the police can trust the DA can trust the police, right? Even when you go after police misconduct investigations.
I think that's a critical point, Mike, right? Because there are other cases that need to be done, and you have to have a relationship. So, yeah, I tried an FBI agent when I was a federal prosecutor for lying. He lied about having an affair with a confidential informant. It led him to do some bad things, intimidate witnesses. We charged him. And at the same time, I was working with on other cases that, it was not that model we just discussed. We had a whole docket that had this case, and I had FBI agents. I talked to them. Just got to be frank with people. There was some discomfort about this. And I said, well, look, do you sleep with confidential informants? Do you lie about the work that we're doing together? Do you intimidate witnesses? Of course, no. I said, all right, well, look, you got to be for this prosecution too. Like at a minimum, he's making your job harder. He's ruining, being FBI agent is very prestigious. He's ruining that for you, So this case is about the integrity of the system, and you got to be a part of it. So I have a lot of those conversations with law enforcement, and I think you are right. There's a lot of pressure for them not to speak publicly, although we've seen a little bit of that change. So the police chief in Atlanta with protesters, but I think there's a lot of pressure on them not to speak out. But privately, a lot of them say, "Yeah, I would never do what that guy did." Now they fall short and say, like, "I don't know if you need to prosecute him," but having that conversation is so important. And the other thing, when I talk to them, I talk about the kind of cases I've done, working with law enforcement. I prosecuted the owner of a $30 million business who was laundering tens of millions of dollars for an international violent enterprise. And I talked to them, and they said, "Oh, you did that too?" I said, "Yeah, this is not, as you said, this is not a one chord song, right?" Yeah. Like, I'm not saying the only thing that we should be doing is police accountability. It is essential, but we got to do this other stuff. And they said, "Oh, well, yeah, I want to. If you can do that kind of case and sort of, that operation was, killing people and things like that. Okay, yeah, we need to stop and say, yeah, it's all of the above approach. The reason why the police accountability stuff is so important is so we can work together with trust with the community when there are, dangerous things that need to be addressed."
Yeah. Listen, that's it. I'm just going to let you close by saying, and I think we've covered all the bases of your candidacy when you really think about it, right?
All I would say is this conversation is against the backdrop of a system which really is two tiers of justice, right? This is almost like one example of a broader construct where people are treated differently. So in Manhattan, we all know about the first Harvey Weinstein where he was on tape. I can promise you, in fact, I don't have to promise you, I can tell you another case of a black man where the police taped him by mistake, and they were talking about how they didn't have enough evidence. Same kind of case, sort of a sexual assault allegation, but how they knew they didn't have enough evidence, and the witnesses there were no complaining witnesses. Sybase took that case to trial. But when Harvey Weinstein was on tape admitting to sexually assaulting someone, he didn't do that first case. So the police accountability is one example of a system that's got these different tiers depending upon who you are. So it's part of a broader conversation, and my candidacy is about dismantling that second system, that two-tier system in all ways. And I would just want to say, it is equally consistent, I think, compatible, and you cannot have safety without justice. So some people say, "Oh, that's not going to keep us safe." No. The abiding question should be, what keeps us safe? Honest law enforcement who don't, use excessive force, that keeps us safe quite directly. And then also, more broadly through the community trust and the kind of cases we should be doing that are system cases, that keep us safer, like the violent criminal enterprise where we took the money away from it. So it's part of a broader conversation. I thank you so much for having the Quadrant and for talking about my candidacy. But I guess I'd just like to broaden it out. I think the real power, which but I want to just say it, is it being nationwide. I mean, there's so many district attorneys in this country, and we've had some gains in some jurisdictions, but there's so many. And yeah, we got to vote in November, and we got to get this dude out the White House. He's a train wreck. He's a racist, But that's not enough, right? We've got to get into all these local races and do things like employ the Quadrant.
Can you let people know your website, how they can reach you, and all that kind of good stuff?
Definitely. So I'm at alvinbragg.com, ALVINBRAGG, and on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, I'm at Alvin Bragg NYC.
Now, I know you guys don't have your election this November. It's next November, correct?
The June primary. So next June, a year from now, will be the primary. And as a general matter, the November is.
All right, perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, make sure you go to his website, alvinbragg.com, and engage with him. And make sure you look at all the other candidates who are running too as well. And you make the decision here. Ladies and gentlemen, stay right there. We'll be right back with Adam Rodriguez.
We gon' be all right. To the shelter, this is pure. We'll help you if you felt too insecure to be the star you always knew you were.
What's up, world? It's your boy, Mike Muse. Welcome to an episode of the Mike Muse Show. I am so excited to be in conversation with my next guest. One, I've been able to partner with him on another previous project, but then two, the reason why he's here today is to promote this not a new show, but a show on Showtime called Penny Dreadful, City of Angels. And there are some parallels to my own personal story, to what some of the things that his character is advocating for. It's very personal, it's very deep. Let's just jump to it and welcome no other than Mr. Adam Rodriguez. What's happening, Adam?
What's up, Mike? How are you, man? Good to be here.
Good. We always talk about all the time. It's almost become a cliche, so I want to make sure we give more meat and bones to it about representation matters in Hollywood. Not only does representation matter in Hollywood on the film and on the big screen, small screen, but also matters in panels and forums and summits such as that, right? Like Bettina and I work really hard to make sure that we curate panelists that have reflection of community, right?
Yeah.
Because it's important for Latino audiences and young students to see someone like you who has been so successful in film and television that may have a similar background, may have similar stories like them, or nonetheless looks like them, talking to them in person, and they can exchange a Q&A with you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, it's the only way we're going to get to the point where the things that we use now as tools to relate to, whether that's looking like somebody or coming from the same place, we got to put all of that into the past, you know, and hopefully eventually just have it be all about frequency, you know, and whether or not people resonate with that frequency that they feel and see from somebody else, you know. We are living in an era, I think, where there's a lot of confusion behind what's being portrayed and what's actually reality, you know, and, you know, we deal with that now on social media and things that didn't exist before, where people can portray a life that they're living that may not be the actual life that they're living. And I think that's the importance of artistry. I think that, you know, when people get really good at watching real artistry, they also get really good at intuiting like where that artistry is coming from, and being able to identify with something in that helps hopefully make their lives a better thing. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that in some way I'm contributing to that. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, in terms of the panels and on-screen representation, you know, there has to be more of it. There has to be more of it. We've got a long way to go before we're there. You know, before the representation is correlates with the actual population of people and you know, in the country.
Absolutely. And I'm going to move on from the Careers in Film Summit. Don't worry, Showtime. We're going to but there's just something I'm reminding of. There was a young Latino girl who came up on the microphone, and we were talking about filmmaking and art of filmmaking, and there was a cost that came up. And so sometimes how filmmaking can be cost prohibitive, and we're talking about solutions where now you can shoot on your iPhone, you can use different methods to shoot and create a lower budget. But her perspective was she comes from a certain area of Los Angeles that's predominantly Latino. And so she was just saying, like, in terms of that would her story matter in a difficulty time she may have. And the panelists really just shrouded her in love and said, you being a minority, you thinking you have less actually is more of a competitive advantage to you, because it can make the storytelling that much more authentic, right? Absolutely. And so I'm a dovetail that.
And you're used to doing more with less. I mean, look, you know, sometimes starting out with less is a great advantage, because you already know how to do without. You know, so then when you do start getting tools added to your toolbox, you know, whether that's, you know, a bigger budget or some piece of equipment that you might not have had otherwise, you're only going to be able to do more with that already, but you've got to do the most with what you have, no matter how much or how little that is. And if really telling story is what you want to do, then you will find a way to do it, because all it takes is a pen and a piece of paper. And I know anybody can get a hold of that. You know, even if you can't put it on an iPhone, write a script, write a book, you know, do something that was going to allow you to express this thing inside of you, which is only going to make you a better person, a stronger person, a smarter person, a more evolved person. And hopefully whatever it is you have to say is going to touch someone else, and you know, and you're going to find your audience somewhere, whether that's a very small audience of people that know you and want to read what you did, or maybe it, you know, rings a big bell and resonates some, you know, throughout the world. That's, you know, but it's all on you. You got to do it. You know, you got to look for the opportunity and not the obstacle. The obstacles are always going to be there, whether that's budget, money, you know, I don't have representation, I don't know who to give this to or where to start with it. forget about all of that. Look
Yeah.
for the opportunity. The opportunity is you have an opportunity to tell a story. You have an opportunity to do something creative. Take that first step and do that, and do it to the best of your ability, and do it again and refine it and refine it. And, you know, during the course of that time, you're going to find the other ways, other opportunities will present themselves because your energy is going to be taking you in that direction. So inevitably, you're going to cross paths with people that could actually take the thing you're doing and maybe help you do something more with it.
Adam, I keep smiling, man, just because it's so exciting to have, it's refreshing to have this conversation with someone of color and who is a man and really looks at the privilege and role and responsibility you have, and understanding that it's a journey, right? The representation that two men of color are having about this, it never loses me on moments like this. And I can hear your authenticity. I see why you post the way that you did, talking about I believe your friend Jesse Toro, you know.
Oh yeah.
And then seeing you shouting out your cousin who was a filmmaker for Michelle Obama. It's like you are a walking testament of someone who, you know, walks the walk, you know, talks the talk, but also walks the walk, and then helping building community, right? And then promoting. I thought it was really special seeing how in this time of Penny Dreadful, you know, you're hot right now. This is your moment, but yet you're sharing it, you know, with Jesse and with your cousin. And I think that's how we
Nadia. Yeah, my cousin Nadia did. She did Becoming, the Michelle Obama documentary. She directed that and shot it. And yeah, I mean, you know, look, the joy of success is enjoying success with the people you care about. And for anybody that's ever achieved some level of success, I can tell you for sure that there really is no long-lasting enjoyment of it if you're doing it alone. And, you know, and to not do it alone, you've got to celebrate the people around you that are also trying to, you know, work towards their goals. And you got to celebrate each other. And I got to say, I'm really fortunate in my friendships and in my family where we have always been about pushing each other to be our best. You know, and not cutting each other down, and not looking for ways to, you know, not looking for ways essentially to keep people wherever we're at. We're trying to always push to the next level, because I know for sure the minute you get to the other side of that, you're going to put your hand down and help bring me back up, you know, and then that's how it's got to be. You know, it's the only way to progress. And, you know, we've got to do that for each other as people of color. We've got to do it for each other as human beings. You know? I mean, in conversation or whatever it is, you know, we've got so many obstacles to get over in this climate that we're living in right now. And sometimes putting that hand down and reaching up to lift somebody else up is in the course of a conversation with somebody who has a completely different viewpoint than you do. Sometimes it's about finding that person that you would normally want to be like, oh, stupid. I can't even talk to that person. No, that's the person you need to go talk to. Yeah. That's the person that you need to dialogue with respectfully, and not make it be about conflict, and just try to approach something from a point of understanding. And hopefully you help each other get over whatever that obstacle is. You know, maybe you don't. Maybe all you get to do is move the needle 1 degree, you know, and you send them on their way. But that 1 degree over the course of time.
And which makes me come around to your character on Penny Dreadful, Raul Vegas, who's a union leader and activist. The show was set in the 1930s, really advocating for the Mexican community, for a California freeway that's coming through. Adam, that is a personal story for me, because I recently discovered, probably within the last 10 years, man, that my grandfather, I'm from Lansing, Michigan. And my grandfather, a Black man, was the first entrepreneur in Lansing, Michigan. And he had a restaurant in Lansing, Michigan, but they built the freeway and it cut right through where his restaurant was. And due to the government's eminent domain, ended up shutting him down and closing him down. So this narrative has a really personal resonance with me, right? In a sense of like how it happens and how it can impact communities, right?
And all in, you know, and this is where it gets tricky, is that all of this gets done in the name of progress, right? And it's a very tricky, it's a tricky word, because it's progress, but then you have to go ... for who, you know? Now, is it progress for all? Maybe it is, you know, and sometimes there is collateral damage for things. But of course, there are ways to approach this so that both sides of the equation can actually be in harmony to move forward with that progress, as opposed to somebody being marginalized and discounted and thrown aside versus, you know, the other side getting what they want.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we don't exist in a world where, at least not in our world, where this is how things get done politically or through government, you know. And you got to look at the other side too, I guess. I mean, look, it's hard to move things in a direction that they need to go in, and sometimes people are going to be resistant, and there's going to be another group of people that thinks they know better and they've got to take things in that direction. And I don't care what those people say, this is what has to get done, you know. But man, what I'm hoping for is that telling stories like this, even if it just starts on a small level, which it has to, is that two people, just like it is now, two men talking to each other, having a conversation, having a dialogue, and finding ways to build as opposed to destroy, you know, and finding ways to, you know, hopefully accomplish things that will be for the greater good of all people, you know. But it has to begin with an ability to dialogue and empathize and to understand that person's needs and their wants and their desires, and to respect them, you know, mutually, and then to begin building from there. And you know, I'm just hope that shows like this show, like none of the conflict that we're experiencing now, none of the discourse, none of that's new. Yeah. And what I hope people understand is that here we're talking about 92 years ago, this show is taking place. And we're still now going through the same fights. People are still fighting to be considered Americans. People are still fighting to, you know, to have rights that should be afforded them as Americans. And we're not there yet, you know. And hopefully through storytelling and building empathy through characters that people can relate to, people then watch things like that and then go out into the world and see people they might not have seen before, and they relate to them the way they might relate to that character on a screen. You know, and that's, I think, the importance of what we do as storytellers, and why, you know, why I love doing what I'm doing, and hopefully communicating to people in some way.
Well, I love how you're communicating right now, because I've always looked at the reason why I love film and television and art, right? So pretty much all mediums of artistic impression is because it holds up a mirror to society, and it lets us recognize who we are, and it allows us to wrestle with the uncomfortability that's facing us. And also too, the medium allows it to moderate social discourse. And I find it interesting that there's something happening right now in the artistic world where history is almost repeating itself through the lens of art, and art is showcasing where we once were is where we currently are. I'm thinking about right now, I was in conversation with Marsha Gay Harden recently for her show on National Geographic called Barks.
Oh, she's great. I love
her.
Marsha.
I love her.
Yeah.
And we got into a deep dive of her
She's
show.
Wonderful, man. She's wonderful.
Dude, we just talked. Like, you would have thought, like, we actually forgot at one point we were recording because we had to do like a deep dive into nothing about Barskins, but all about Barskins at the same time. Because it went to what you and I are talking about, this notion of othering, right? It was set in the 1600s, right? When like it was this whole nation building, right? Understanding who America's doctrine is and our Constitution and what they did to Native Americans, right? And this whole immigration and othering kind of aspect. And here we are seeing it happen right now, where Native Americans and First Nation people are still not respected and treated well, right? And we're beginning to seeing how fragile our Constitution really is. That is not the strong document that we once thought, as we see it becoming unraveled to a certain extent in certain areas and pockets of democracy and discourse. But then we look at your show that you have coming up, is set in the 1930s through this medium of Mexican folklore that's being told, which is beautiful, by the way, and it's shot well. And I love the artistic, fantastical moment of all of that. But then here we are talking about immigration, othering, and this makes you think about like the cages that's down at the border, and this makes you think about how individuals with capitalism and money can look at individuals as commodities, and how this movement, you know, can occur. It's almost as if you didn't have to put 1930s down. Maybe if you were to change the clothes a little bit, it will be the exact same replica of current times. Yeah. So I'm curious, Adam, like just kind of going through all that machinations of all of that, like what was it like for you, like being a person of color, having to sit in these storylines, and you're human, so you're still watching current news, right? While you're shooting something in real time. Like, what was kind of forming your ability to emote, right? And to project this empathy of your characters?
I mean, really, I was just so deeply connected to the character and the story, because it was really getting into what we're talking about today. I mean, and to have a character that actually could stand up and represent all of the things that we're talking about now in terms of standing up for the other side of the equation, the people that are not spoken for most often, and to be able to be a dignified character who had a voice that should be heard, that was every bit respectable and and deserved to be heard, and felt deeply. It was a compassionate person, loves his family. I mean, all of the things that somebody you would respect has, and he had this counterpoint of view to what, maybe what we were seeing being done in this country right now. And I felt excited to be that voice. I felt excited to have a character to embody and to really build, even, from what was on the page, and create some living thing that was going to be the representation for all of that. I wanted people to see that and feel something, to feel charged up, to feel like they understood something a little better that they might not have understood before.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of the news itself, I stay away from the news, man. I don't watch the news at all.
Yeah.
Not
to comment on news. I meant like while you were shooting, you're
right. No. I'm saying like I didn't even. I mean, I see the headlines, so I can't pretend like I'm living in a bubble. Of course, I see the headlines. I see what's going on there. But it didn't really have an effect on me because it's not a regular part of my, my diet.
That's for self-care, brother. Let me tell you on that one.
Oh yeah, no, I learned that a long time ago, man. I would say I've been that way for close to
what's interesting when you were talking, Adam, I wasn't thinking about this, and my audience knows that I don't write any questions down. You know that from the last time I moderate you, I just go with the flow of the conversation and energy.
Listen,
yeah. And when you were talking about bringing a dignified character to the screen. And we always look about that from the Black lens in terms of how Black males are portrayed on camera. Is always very like hyper masculine, very overly sexualized. It's always just brooding, dark-skinned brother or this bright light guy. Dark-skinned brother is always in all these muscles, right? It's very sexualized, right? It's always like an object of desire. And just hearing you talk about that from like Raul and this Mexican American, and it made me just think about Cesar Chavez, right? For some reason, I just went there, and it made me realize how we haven't heard or seen his story told so much. And I'm not comparing Raul to Cesar Chavez. Everyone has their own.
No, but it's a great comparison.
I'm just saying.
I think you're right on there, because I will tell you that in preparing this character, I try to build from the history that would have, that Raul would have grown up in and the influences he would have had at that time. But I also want to see down the line, where he's going, and maybe what somebody like him would have done in terms of sending that ripple out into the world. And I really believed, as I was creating Raul, that Raul was a character that would have inspired Cesar Chavez. Like Cesar Chavez would have been a kid seeing Raul and going, that's who I want to be. That's what I want to do. I want to stand up for people. I want to fight for people. And so, I love the fact that you're actually drawing a comparison there, because that's exactly what I was thinking in that time.
That makes me happy, man. Just because I feel like we all need more representation of that, right? And we need to see all of our heroes in a way where we can learn from outside of these traditional history books. And, the K-12 public school system isn't the best in America. And so they barely talk about MLK and Malcolm X. That's all they talk about. They forget about all the other heroes. And when we do get to Mexican-American activists, the only one we talk about is Cesar Chavez. And we haven't even, to me, I could be just ignorant, but we haven't even seen, like, on film and television, like, his story told in a very, like, interesting kind of way. So we can learn his ways of activism and then, like, move into this perspective. Adam, this has been amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, that is our show.